It took some time, but I finally got exemplary footage portraying exactly what's Berserker and, to be honest, Warrior's major problem in PvP. This is low platinum game, and therefore players know what they are doing. This Deadeye specifically. Multiple times throughout this fight, you can see how close I come to death, while not even once having a clear shot at downing the Deadeye. He can stay alive by kiting, utilizing stealth, and generally attacking from beyond my immediate engagement range. Clever player, fit for platinum. What I want you to pay attention though is how much it takes in this clearly 1v1 scenario for me to survive. I utilize 2 short cooldown blocks and a Source of Ages with Shield Master on top. A stance that prevents me from getting critically hit, a stance that converts damage taken into healing, a stance that grants adrenaline and resistance to nullify debilitating conditions that would otherwise hinder my gameplay, all while getting quick and easy access to Berserk, entering and exiting which gives me a moment of strike damage immunity. Not to mention stance I access thanks to Defy Pain and extended duration of all stances combined with Vigor and Barrier from Last Stand, on top of which benefits of hardened ammo and adrenal health. Further than this, I heal from damage done, and my burst skills are enough to force Deadeye to disengage into stealth and cast his heal skill, and I have almost 30,000 health to begin with. Not to mention, thanks to fast hands reducing cooldown of weapon swap, I can cycle between my weapon skills faster than it would be otherwise possible, so I can use both my blocks off cooldown. Additional benefits from Discipline, that is, increased movement speed and reduced cooldowns of burst skills, are hard to downplay when chasing slippery foe and forcing him to disengage is my only way of buying time in between my valuable defensive cooldowns. What I'm playing is the single tankiest Berserker build possible, only short of equipping shield instead of torch, but that would leave me with less Condi cleanse and no kill pressure at all. What I want to communicate is, you can't really go tankier than this without committing to a meme build, and this tankiest plausible setup is pushed to its absolute limits in a 1v1 against good player. And here's the kicker. There is no possible way for any Berserker power build to be this tanky. No power damage amulet except Valkyrie has as much vitality as Carrion amulet. To play with Valkyrie amulet and still be able to kill anything, Warrior needs guaranteed crits from Arm Straight Line, and to access that, he has to part ways with Defense, Discipline or his Elite spec. All 3 of these are absolutely necessary to stay alive and succeed in Platinum or even high gold lobbies. Further than this, whatever power weapon you compare to main condition lineup, you'll quickly notice that ironically, Power Warrior needs to stick to targets for longer to have kill pressure, despite having more burst damage. And that's due to how condition damage is applied. In Power Weapon's case, Warrior must be in range of target for every tick of damage. In case of Condition Weapon, he only needs to land the hit that applies conditions, and the DOT will run its course. And therefore, player doesn't have to stick to enemy as tightly. Not to mention, skills like Impale and Flaming Flurry have ranged components, which further reduces Warrior's need to stick to targets to deal his damage. This would be a worthy trade-off for having more upfront damage if survivability and sustain, access to defensive utility, cleanse and mobility on power-related weapons weren't wars by a proxy. There isn't a power damage weapon that lets you clear conditions. There's a Warhorn, a support weapon, and Torch, a comedy weapon with next to no power damage and false information posted on a tooltip. Axe and Hammer don't even bring adrenaline-independent mobility options, or any defensive utility at all. Dagger was for years balanced around Spellbreaker, having between 17 and 34% damage increase in PvP mode of all places, which is completely absurd no matter how you think about it. Greatsword has 4 skills, including Burst, because 100 blades, even with previewed buff, does less damage than Auto Chain on top of rooting you in place. And Rifle is a meme. No matter how much you increase damage of Power Berserker, dedicated power weapons are clunkier to use, provide less mobility, provide no defensive utility, require you to opt out of defensive traits, expect you to play with far less health than condition builds, or some combination of these. Hammer and Mace power builds have to choose between Merciless Hammer and Defy Pain or Resilient Roll. On top of which, choose between Stalwart Strength and Last Stand or Cleansing Ire. What connects these two choices is that Defy Pain and Last Stand are the strongest combination of defensive traits Berserker has access to. So, power builds either have to cope with having significantly lower defensive utility or 30% less damage than what they're balanced around having. But on the other hand, only hammer builds can utilize Valkyrie stats, because crit setup from arms enabling that choice requires heavy lockdown to utilize unsuspecting foe and to generate enough adrenaline through Opportunist to keep taking advantage of burst precision. So you either have to play without strongest defensive utility available or with 9000 less health, on top of having to stick much more closely to your opponents with weapons that often have less mobility or have skills that root you in place, and having your damage significantly gimped by weakness, protection, and every strike damage immunity effect in the game, every damage reduction skill, effect or trait, not to mention toughness, which affects everything except conditions, because of course it does. With all that, you may ask, how the hell does Spellbreaker play power and not just collapse? Well, Spellbreaker has Magebane Tether to prevent his opponent from going invisible and fucking off to Narnia as soon as they take damage. His two most commonly used bursts are both unblockable and strip boons, so enemy can't cack you with Aegis spam, can't gimp your damage with permanent protection, and can't utilize swiftness alone to kite you for free. Not to mention, counter is baseline available every 12 seconds, and its cooldown is reduced by versatile power down to 8 seconds. So by default, Spellbreaker is just ignoring half of the issues, and that's before we count in that to have 10% more crit damage, all he has to do is have a dagger equipped. That combined with Attacker's Insight, granting up to 225 of all 3 power damage stats, means that 2-hit dagger combo available every 8 seconds with no setup can easily cross 1200 damage threshold, leaving your offhand and your second weapon set to be entirely free and possibly dedicated to mobility, defense, and utility. In short, Spellbreaker was designed to function in PvP. Warrior in general wasn't. There are 2 core trait lines in entirety of the class that can't be considered in some way griefing. Look at this. Hardstack.gg. Discipline, discipline, discipline. Defense, discipline, defense, discipline, discipline, discipline. Meta battle. Defense, discipline, defense, discipline, defense, discipline, defense, discipline, defense, defense, discipline, discipline, defense, discipline, defense, discipline, defense, discipline, defense, discipline, defense, discipline. Welcome to PvP, the land of defense discipline. This is the problem with warrior build variety in PvP. That power discrepancy between defense discipline and non-defense discipline warrior is so big that playing anything that isn't defense discipline or adjacent is practically a reportable offense. Dear whoever it may concern, if a feature is absolutely necessary for a class to function, why isn't this feature a baseline feature? 90% of Warrior's success in all 3 game modes hinges on 5 seconds weapon swap and reduced cooldowns of best skills from versatile power. And its success in PvP hinges also on cleanse from Brawler's recovery and sustain and tankiness from defense. Arena, you started the war on CDR traits. When will you finish it? Arena, you notice that Warrior needs sustain and survivability. When will you put some in a different trait line than this one? I yearn for the day I will be able to play a build that doesn't include either defense, no discipline, and not feel like I'm playing some kind of cruel challenge run. If I'm to be asked, all 3 minor traits in discipline should be baseline functions of the class, and every trait line should have at least some kind of sustain and some utility mixed in. For example, you could make arms heal you for 7% of damage done to bleeding targets, to go with the theme of the trait line. Numbers can always be adjusted in the end to make everything relatively balanced. What can't be fixed with number adjustments is the dominance of defense discipline lineup. Because these two provide more utility than everything else combined, only the builds that synergize with said lineup have a place in PvP. Warrior needs reworks. The core trait lines, to outdated weapons and skills, and very probably to the class mechanic itself. So Arena, stop rolling around the goulash and get to work. And if you don't have enough ideas on how to change and rework Warrior, consider subscribing, because I have no better thing to do with my free time than to do your job. You're welcome. Crabface out.